everybody, welcome back to Exponential Finance, the podcast covering finance, technology and innovation, from our home in Japan and beyond. In this episode, Binur Zhalenov will share his experience as the Chief Executive Officer of one of the most significant FinTech R&D companies in Central Asia and the Caucasus region. Binur's research focus is concentrated around payment innovations and artificial intelligence applications for macroeconomic modeling. He is leading a retail central bank digital currency pilot project, also known as the Digital Tenge, as well as a number of other initiatives related to digital financial infrastructure, such as decentralized finance, stablecoins and open banking, which we will touch upon in this podcast. And now, please welcome Binur Zhalenov, CEO of the Payment and Financial Technologies Center of the National Bank of Kazakhstan.
Binur, thanks very much for taking the time and joining us. Welcome to the show. There is a lot going on in the space that you're in, so we have a long list of things to cover. But before we do so, maybe you can share a bit about your upbringing and also how you feel, because you share a very long northern border with Russia. You border China in the east. So when you grow up in Kazakhstan, what is the identity that you feel you're growing up with?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Actually, we gained our independence around 30 years ago after Soviet Union collapsed. And after that, our geopolitical game was something that is called a dance between bear and dragon. So that's why our government established what they call multi-vector geopolitical strategy. So we are trying to be good friends with everyone and keep our international policy pragmatic and rational, because obviously Russian Federation is one of the key trade partners. We have pretty long historical ties with Russian nation. It's the same with China as well. Personally, I didn't feel any pressure living in this environment. Probably it even helped us, particularly our generation, to raise in this mix of cultures, because more influence, of course, comes from Russian Federation, given our historical ties during the Soviet Union and Russian Empire before. But still there are some influence and impact from Chinese nation. This mixture actually helped us to develop some unique culture and what we call a multicultural approach. And I think it impacted a lot the innovative capacity of our nation, especially when we're talking about fintech. Kazakhstan is one of the leading jurisdictions in terms of fintech development. You probably heard about Kaspi, which was the second largest IPO in 2020 in London Stock Exchange. Essentially digital financial ecosystem. I think that just helps us to be more innovative.
You personally also spent some time in New York, where you took a Master's of Science.
My experience living in the US, New York and Philadelphia, of course, helped to expand horizons in a sense, but also what I experienced. So we usually had this mode of thinking and belief that somewhere in the West, there are much more smarter and creative people, etc., etc., etc. But actually, I realized that the actual innovative potential and capacity of my peers here in nation is at least at the same level as people have all around the world. It helped to break this mental barrier and try to bring and build something here in Kazakhstan. That's why I arrived back from the US. And I actually wanted to point out another interesting program that we have called Bolashak, that is government scholarship. It is translated as the future. So it means that students from Kazakhstan can get fully covered scholarship sponsored from the government to get their education in top-ranked universities all over the world, including NYU, Harvard, UPenn, Cambridge, etc., etc. So the program was launched in late 90s. And so far, we have around 20,000 people who get the education from top-ranking universities from all over the world, and now working for the government or, in corporate sector, trying to bring the best experiences from all over the world to our country.
So the number one topic these days is, of course, central bank digital currencies. And you and your organization have been working on that now for quite a while. In fact, from what's being published, you're supposed to be in July, coming toward the end of the current phase of the experiment. Where does it stand currently, and what's been the learning so far? How do you expect this to end up?
Yeah, CBDC is quite a topic. The National Bank of Kazakhstan was no exclusion. So last year, we initiated the public discussion. So actually, on May 4th last year, we published a report for public discussions where we pointed out the key principles and potential foundational features for CBDC. So we decided to stick to test and learn approach. We developed with our partners a proof of concept platform that helped us to test technological viability for core features of prospective digital Tenge. We tried to, structure it within the more broad framework of development the national payment system. So we have something called National Payment System, which includes, RTGS, instant payment system, and other stuff. So in 2020, we actually developed a strategic roadmap and did an audit on what is going on in payment industry. A couple interesting things with respect to CBDC. So first off, we believe that the business models actually of banks and payment service providers is slightly shifting. It's not just transactional business model making fees from making transactions, it's something bigger. There is obviously a shift in consumer patterns. So consumers want to get their payments invisible, instant, and programmable. Actually, we believe that fundamentally, this shift brought this idea of DeFi and cryptocurrencies. Of course, we do realize that there was a high speculative behavior of some people that raised this capitalization of digital assets. But still, we believe that there is a fundamental gap between what central banks can offer to people in payment services and what cannot be fulfilled using traditional instruments. That's where cryptocurrencies, stablecoins, and digital assets, come into the game. When we're talking about crypto and all the stuff, so we see a huge potential for financial inclusion, etc. And we believe that we shouldn't ban that. There should be something called hybrid financial infrastructure that helps to bridge the worlds of traditional financial system and regulated environment. And CBDC, we thought, would be a part of the answer. But I want to be clear here, CBDC is not a tool to replace cryptocurrencies here in Kazakhstan. It's rather probably a part of the solution. When we tried to structure what we're missing from current money system, we thought that it might be programmability. We decided to put particular effort on that. And also we believe in potential of CBDC to increase financial inclusion. At the moment, we have a pretty high share of cashless. So I believe around 80% of payments are completed cashless now in Kazakhstan. But the thing is that they mostly geographically concentrated in big cities, meaning that, in provinces or far regions, there is no much of a penetration. And one of the reasons is a lack of internet connectivity, unstable internet connectivity, low interest from merchants because their margin is low and they don't want to pay fees. We thought that CBDC might be the answer. So based on all of that preconditions, so we developed the concept, did a POC. POC proved that it can, work theoretically. So we did to move this year. We believe that we would complete our decision by the end of this year. Actually, within a couple of weeks, we would present our decision-making framework. So we used the experience of IMF documents, World Economic Forum. Actually, Arab countries did a great job developing their framework. Examples of IENA Europe, of course, papers from Bank of Japan as well. So we actually developed this framework. It's effectively speaking iterative decision tree that helps us at every layer understand the potential and benefits, estimate them. This would include invitation from independent advisory board, because personally, me and my team, we are biased, obviously, towards CBDC. So we decided to make the process as unbiased as possible. So we're forming now the independent advisory board from experts from all over the world, including IMF, BIS, just financial consultants. Then we complete that analysis, they would review that, and by the end of this year, we believe we would have a decision where to move on. We also developed some of the unique features for a CBDC platform because we sort of exploring a lot the possibilities for anonymity, because in principle, what we want to reach is this balance between anonymity of transactions and AML safety considerations. Probably philosophically, it will be something that until certain threshold, CBDC would be cash-like, so nobody can see the transaction, but after certain threshold, and there is actually a high possibility of using all this fancy stuff like zero-no proof, and also offline. So we're exploring the chain of offline transactions. We have some ideas on that. We shared that in our white paper, and we're developing these ideas today. This November, we actually launch a pilot project in CBDC. It will be a minimum viable product of CBDC platform. Real consumers and real merchants and real financial institutions would join that, would be in limited controlled environments. It would help us to test what we call non-functional requirement, capacity, and cybersecurity considerations and stuff. In parallel, we have second stream called sandbox mode of CBDC, where we test more advanced functionality. like chain of offline transactions, etc., etc. So it would help us to actually technologically experiment and see the viability of the product. The last point, we also economic analysis. For these reasons, we build in a couple of models, including DG models. At the moment, we are completing our survey, representative survey on customer behavior towards CBDC, in order to approximate the level of adoption and see what factors actually would influence adoption to manage all that potential financial stability risks and develop probable regulation. That's a long story short.
And it is a long story, and there's so much in there, but at the same time, it's really moving fast, at least from the outside perspective, right? And I'm living in Japan, so I'm following what the BOJ has been doing. They've been at it since 2017, even together with the European Central Bank. So we've been also early in collaborating, but 5 years later, we're still like in technical proofs, and now it's a more advanced technical proof. But everything you've just described was executed in 21 and then towards the end of 22. It's a very compressed time frame. Everything is very, very fast.
Yeah, it is. We actually adopted what we call agile methodologies, all the stuff, because I think sometimes the problem is that naturally central banks are risk averse. It's sort of hard to reframe thinking about that. So we try to reimagine how we would construct the work to do as much stuff as possible within a packed amount of time. We understand that we assume certain risks on that. But I think when you talk about innovation, it's important to adopt this mindset. What is also important, it is absolutely critical to engage with financial institutions because they can share a lot. So we're already trying to collaborate with them. Of course, there are like a bunch of discussions on different matters, but they have a pretty interesting, ideas how, it could work in principle. They help us actually to do a lot of fancy work. Overall, the pace towards CBDC is accelerating. Just last week, Bank of Russia announced that they are going to start the real transactions using digital ruble in April 2023. There are 22 provinces in China who are already accepting transactions in digital yuan. Given the potential of cross-border transactions with one of our key trade partners and what European Union is doing, it is important to move at least at the same pace.
The focus on your CDBC so far is more on the retail side, correct?
We decided that probably implementation of retail CBDC brings much more risks and uncertainty than wholesale per se. And effectively, it's much more work needs to be done in retail CBDC space because essentially doing wholesale exercises, we saw it a little bit easier. And given that we have 4 to 5 international CBDC projects, for example, Project Ubin and Jasper, what mBridge is doing, what SNB did actually with other central banks. We thought that wholesale CBDC experimentation can be transferred a little bit easier than retail because retail have to take into account a very specific nuances of particular market. So we decided it just would be faster to retail and then on top of that build the wholesale story.
Offline is one of the big problems that I think every CDBC implementation struggles with. You have offline, you talked about anonymity and then programmability. It's like the big 3 problems. If you solve that, then you really solve for retail CDBC.
Absolutely. In terms of programmability, actually, we see a huge potential of collaboration with market players. So this summer, we would present an SDK for them so that they can test and learn building smart contract on CBDC platform. Because we believe that inevitably in the future, while CBDC adoption would be a bit higher, it would, of course, impact the balance sheets. And overall transactional business model is changing. So it is important for second-tier banks to actually find ways to build new revenue streams and probably to solve this gap that is fundamentally solved by DeFi now. We believe that this particular functionality of CBDC can help them to adapt to this changing world and probably to incorporate DeFi in a sense. So for these reasons, we're doing with our partners, we're providing training for second-tier banks developers. Then we do this exercise called exploration, where we're trying to help them to find a value proposition for their consumers, given the properties that digital Tenge has. And then as a final exercise, sort of which we give them certificates, is build a smart contract for the service that can be offered for consumers by them. That sort of exercise that would take a whole summer, but in the end, we want to get this list of financial services built on digital Tenge platform and that actually use programmability a lot. Coming back to wholesale story, it's natural that big central banks representing G7 or G20 focus more on that because they actually set the standards. Because I believe that key problems needs to be solved in wholesale. CBDC align more in methodological space. When we're talking about standards of exchange, how it's structured, etc., etc. So we, in a sense, waiting when the global community would come up with certain standards, and I think BIS did a great job on that. Once we will see the census on particular thing, we obviously would accelerate our job.
In this context, where do you see third-party stablecoins then playing? Will this be partly that private sector banks that you mentioned that will have programmability on your platform? Will this essentially be a sense of a private stablecoin on your platform? And will there be still like a different protocol, other private stablecoins possibly that will be accepted in Kazakhstan?
We are publishing green paper report considerations on DeFi and digital assets. I just finished that, got approval for publication. DeFi is quite a controversial topic. And if you look at what the other regulators is doing, obviously, essentially there are a number of steps. You cannot ban DeFi or you cannot ban cryptocurrencies per se. It is simply impossible. You should ban internet. And even Chinese experience showing that despite the fact that they ban mining, China is still one of the leading countries, in mining cryptocurrency. So it simply doesn't work. So it is important to find other regulatory approach. But again, given the decentralized nature, there is no entity who can regulate on that, and a number of challenges there. And given all of these incidents that happened with Terra Luna or last year Titan stablecoin, we think it poses certain risks for consumers as for unqualified investors. Broadly speaking, our approach here as follows. It is important to work through gatekeepers because when you look at the macro picture, you want to control the liquidity run and capital flows from traditional financial system to DeFi because that's where the core problems to macro financial stability lie. So it is important to build these ties with centralized crypto exchanges, legalize their status, provide certain regulation on that, and to keep these KYC, AML procedures, etc., etc., etc. Of course, we do realize that there will be still a window to uncontrolled using decentralized exchange, etc., etc. But we believe that consumers usually, in majority, prefer using these particular gates and keepers. So it is important to build this regulated environment where the majority of citizens and people, are coming. That's where probably our regulation will move on. Talking about stable coins, again, given that our economy is not so big, and actually, if we talk about centralized stable coins backed up with some assets, they usually operate in other jurisdictions, so you don't really have a full control over that. The same story with algorithmic stable coins. So it's now we're still working on how we would accept that, but at the moment there is a consensus here at the National Bank that we would not accept any digital assets, including stablecoin, as a means of payment, because it poses still a certain risk. But we'll think about that in the future, because again, there might be a tokenized real asset that's essentially a stablecoin backed up by legal entity here in Kazakhstan. Probably we might consider these kind of things. This September, we'll publish a new bill called Digital Assets Bill, where we will present the taxonomy and classification for our, for these digital assets, and we'll try to provide risk-based regulation towards certain, types.
Wonderful, thank you. When we're talking about the programmability on your platform for like second-tier banks, for example, they would still program the digital Tenge, and so it would still be, and basically in addition to the liability of the Kazakhstan central bank, it's not a private sector stablecoin, it's still the central bank money that's being programmed.
We're exploring this opportunity. I don't really know at the moment how the operating mode would work. But yeah, so essentially we want to provide banks with ability to program the money and use this essentially, digital. And probably we're even considering issuing private stable coins backed up by wholesale digital Tenge, which, might work. The thing is that they would develop smart contracts, then probably central bank would audit these, smart contracts and then approve or disapprove their usage on CBDC platform. But again, there are so many unknowns in the future. So we'll see how it, roll out. And I think by September, we will have quite a number of interesting insights on that.
So talked about CBDC, stablecoins, DeFi, digital assets in general, maybe open banking. Do you do open banking
Yeah.
as well?
Yeah, open banking is actually quite a topic. So let me provide a bit of an overview of Kazakhstan specifics here. We have a pretty mature fintech market, primarily driven by second-tier banks that now actually not just banks, they are digital platforms that provide GovTech, like public services in electronic format, marketplace services, travel industry, stuff. So we have a number of different second-tier banks operating in such mode. And the role of data is growing and growing, especially of personal data. And the thing is that the current situation is so complex, if we talk about IT architecture of this platform, so that they have so deep and tight integration with government databases and all the stuff, but we're still missing one of the important is a holistic framework to provide digital consent and digital identification from the consumer. And we believe that's where the foundational open banking principles should come into reality when the consumer have the full control and ownership of their data in terms of moving that, given access, prohibiting access, and all this stuff. That's why we decided to work with the market on what we call NBK tech stack. That is something really similar that India did, like India stack, 4 layers of decentralized infrastructure, digital identification, digital consent, data exchange, and payments. And by July, we would publish our white paper on that, how it would work and operate, because essentially we have almost all parts of puzzles, but disintegrated. We simply should to integrate everything in the right framework, provide the regulation, and then see. Of course, there are a bunch of innovative potential of open banking principles as well, because the thing is that the majority of traditional financial institutions don't want to open their data sources for fintechs or third-party providers, and we believe that there is a huge potential to further increase the maturity of our market. So we would develop these open API standards and then slightly probably would impose using these standards for particular processes. I'm talking about payment initiation probably and transactional data exchange. But still a lot to learn. We don't want to break anything that already works. So it is important to engage with financial institutions and markets. We're actually doing this customer development stage at the moment, talking with everyone, understanding what is going on. We also looked closely what European Union is doing because they are revising PSD2, started this service, etc. It also should provide us with some lessons. Because despite that the methodology and facts were developed, there was a room for misinterpretation from particular financial institutions. And in reality, we don't really reach open banking in principle. So it is important to take all of that into consideration. We will build that infrastructure, we will build a regulatory base to that, and hopefully slightly step by step we'll come to this open banking.
You mentioned also a sandbox previously in the context also of CDBC. There's also the discussion around the broader fintech sandbox as well, right?
We launched something called regulatory sandbox. Given that innovation accelerates, there is a possibility that existing regulatory framework don't cover particular, new services and aspects. So we decided it is important to provide a certain flexibility for fintechs and banks on that, and developed something called regulatory sandbox. So essentially, if you have some idea and you don't know, is it even regulated or it's prohibited probably, you can submit the application with explanation of particular business model, how you want to use that, defining the scope of that, for example, for 6 months. After that, we consider certain amendments to regulation probably. And we already have around 20 applications at the moment, reviewing them. We hope that it also would help to break these regulatory barriers in a sense for innovation.
So if you look at everything that you're doing, it's quite an impressive breadth and depth of developing a domestic fintech ecosystem, I would say. And so obviously then Kazakhstan itself will benefit from that. But do you also see this as an export of services? So the idea is to incubate these firms and then also help them to do international business as well?
Well, I don't know. First off, we have to reach goals here. Our mission, is to keep regulation and digital financial infrastructure relevant to this constantly changing world. We actually a subsidiary of the central bank, right, of the National Bank of Kazakhstan. We established that because we believe that central banks should adapt, because at the moment, everything is changing so fast. And there are industries are converging also so fast. So there is no clear boundaries between industries at the moment. So it is kind of hard So we decided to establish this R&D unit to iteratively work. And I think that there are so many things to do and fix even here in Kazakhstan. But what I also believe in is international cooperation. That's why we're trying to keep our project as transparent as possible so that probably other people would learn from our mistakes or our successes. I know that many of the central banks also trying to reach, but we have an ambition probably to, even for particular project, to set the standards, how central banks should approach innovation, not just being risk averse or waiting and seeing, probably testing and learning. And we want to, provide this kind of mindset. And if someone in the world would feel that we can be helpful, of course, we can try.
I think that's a wonderful statement to end up with. It was an amazing conversation. So really appreciate you taking the time and sharing everything that's
Likewise.
going on. Wishing you best of luck. It's really an interesting time, and you're sitting in the eye of the storm and making this all happen in Kazakhstan. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Norman. It was a pleasure, to talk with you. And likewise, so I hope we will keep in touch and probably we will have something to share in the future. Also, I welcome you and anyone to join our discussions. We will launch something called Digital Tenge Hub this June as well. It's like a collaborative platform where everyone can join. Already Visa, Hyperledger, where there are many other companies decided to join this platform. So I think it would be a good place to discuss and collaborate. And yeah, hope to see you all in the future here in Kazakhstan. Welcome to our country. There's so much, to explore here.